Most youth ministry podcasts are made by youth leaders and used to share their ideas on how to engage with the next generation of youth ministry.
But here at the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church, we're going straight to young people themselves to find out what they want from the church.
Like the prophets of the Bible, it is our hope that the voices of our young people will help inspire the church to better adapt to serve the now generation.
This is Mountain Sky Prophets.
Thanks for listening. My name is Amanda Daniel. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the coordinator of Young People's Ministry and Camping Ministry for the Mountain Sky Conference.
And my name is Courtney von Lindern. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am the designer of Next Gen and Inclusiveness Ministries for the Mountain Sky Conference. And on today's episode of Mountain Sky Prophets, I'm delighted to welcome my friend Reghan. Reghan, would you like to tell our listeners about yourself?
Hi, my name is Reghan. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a senior in high school in Missoula, and I just really enjoy being in the outdoors and playing on my accordion and playing with my cats.
Reghan, I didn't realize that you started playing the accordion or that you played the accordion. How long has that been a venture for you?
Yeah, it's been about 6 months. I started playing in my school's jazz band with it, and it's just been an absolute blast so far. So yeah, it's been pretty great.
Well, what caught my attention about your introduction was your cats. Tell us more about your cats.
Oh yeah, I have 4 cats. The first one is Rocky. He is gigantic. And my other cat is named Rattles, but I like to call her Rat because she is a 17-year-old orange cat who is skinnier than anything I have ever seen. And she just likes to sit in the kitchen and squawk, but she's a real sweetheart. And then there's my other cat, Beef, who is really my cat and not my parents'. She only really likes me. And we have a cool, unbreakable bond or whatever. But yeah, she's really cute. And my other cat is an outdoor cat. He's our mouser, and he does his job very well. His name is Harry Potter. He's very talkative. He walks around yapping all the time, and it's kind of entertaining. So yeah, those are all of my cats.
I feel like I've really gotten to know people's pets since we've been on Zoom for so long.
Yeah, same. I feel like every time I'm in a Zoom call, my roommate's cat always has to pop in and hop up and make herself known. So it's nice to know that others have pets around during this fun time of COVID and quarantine and isolation.
Yay!
So Reghan, you're in high school, you're a senior, you're a teenager. What's it like being a teenager in the world today, especially as you're going through high school in COVID?
Yeah, I think it's just I mean, I don't really have anything to compare it to because, I'm only a teenager. That's pretty much all I've been in this personality. Because I mean, when you grow up, you don't really start figuring out who you are in most cases until high school. You're like, oh, okay, this is what I like. I can buy the clothes I want and my mom doesn't have to pick them out all the time, stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's just been a very wild experience because it's a lot of change happening in the span of 10 years as a teenager. The period between middle school and the end of high school, everyone changes so much. And I feel like that on top of world events happening is just really crazy to me because, in middle school, I didn't know the first thing about politics. And then as soon as I get to high school, I'm all of a sudden in speech and debate and I'm around people who are political people. And all of a sudden I'm learning and I'm evolving and I'm changing my interests in all of these things. And I think it's a very cool and special time in people's lives. And with COVID, it's been especially special because, we have to figure out how to navigate online school. But I like to think that teenagers especially are pretty adaptable to this. I know a lot of people have been struggling with school. And in my case, it's just been a struggle to balance my life in all of this, because I can do my schoolwork fine, but at the end of the day, I have 2 extra days where I'm just sitting in my house, and then the other 2 days I'm at school. So it's just like a weird schedule change, but I feel like it's left a lot of room for a lot of people to like grow and figure out more things and learn more stuff, but also maybe to go through some things they wouldn't have had to. So it's just been like another opportunity for growth, in my opinion. Like, it's obviously a horrible natural disaster and like, pandemic is bad, but I feel like teenagers especially have just been feeling a lot of it because so much of their world has changed. And like, I don't know, it's just crazy and weird to me that I'm living in this time that people are going to learn about in history, not just like with the pandemic, but all of the other historical events that have been happening. So it's just like, I'm growing as a person and the world is growing around me. I'm going to look back on this and say, whoa, this is crazy. But honestly, all I'm doing is sitting here on my laptop for 8 hours a day. So yeah, it's just weird to put in that perspective, but I feel like with context, we are living in some pretty crazy times.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting to look back on this and see, and, to think about how we felt during the pandemic. Yeah, Reagan, I was thinking, this pandemic has gone on so much longer, I think, than most of us had ever imagined. So did you ever find yourself like over the summer just really bored?
Actually not really, because I got a job at a local nursery and like garden area place, and it's like a great job, and we were allowed to stay open throughout the whole pandemic because we were considered essential business because of agriculture and people need to be able to grow their own food. So I stayed actually really busy during this pandemic, and it's only been slow since school started. And with the fluctuations between my classes, it's been pretty all right. But I will tell you, the last 2 weeks have been insanely boring because I was a close contact to someone who got COVID. So I have been in my room for the past 11 days, just not able to come out. And I mean, it's been kind of nice because I can just sit in here and do whatever I want. And it's not that much of a change from real life. But then I find myself wanting to like get out of the house and actually be productive at some point, because I really like being a productive person and I just cannot do that in my room. It's a very distracting place to be.
Yeah, I can't imagine being stuck in just like the 4 walls of your own room. Like, I know early on in the pandemic, I figured out pretty quickly that if I like didn't go outside at least once a day or like once every other day, I would start to go like really stir crazy and get pretty grumpy and start having like all these like mood swings. So yeah. So Reghan, thanks again for being on the show. Yeah, we've talked to like 6 other folks now, but we've interviewed and we've gotten a variety of voices and I think perspectives, and a lot of what we talk about on the show too is just kind of people's relationship with spirituality and church and God, and how that's influenced their life or their growth and faith formation. So I'm curious, for you, what does your involvement in church look like?
Yeah, well, it all started when my family moved to Missoula, right? My mom gets this treasurer job for the Methodist Church. Like, her parents were Methodists, so we were going to go to this church, or Grace United anyways. But I don't know, it's just always been a part of my life since I can remember. So it's weird to think that there would ever be a time where there wasn't church for me. And just growing up, it was always Sunday school, let's do communion together. We're going to church on Sunday, and I have to dress up in like a cute little dress and look cute for everyone at church. And I think it was just always a core part of the week, even though we didn't really go every week. And there were definitely periods where we'd slack off for a couple of months, and then my mom would be like, we need to go to church. We need to do that. We have to. We've been slacking. So it's just been like a really interesting part of my life that I never really have thought of my life without it. And just the people there are very lovely. And I know a lot of people have very different experiences with church, but with my church that I grew up in, it's always just been a welcoming, supportive environment. Even if I don't really talk to anyone during the services, you just walk in and it's just a presence of all these people there to do the same thing that you're doing, to sit and listen to a sermon, but also do all the other church stuff. And I think it's just the whole Methodist way from what I've learned about it, because I don't know everything about Methodism, obviously, but from what I've learned, it is just like a very focal point on love type of Christian denomination, which is something that I really agree with. And I feel like the church like shaped that part of me. And throughout my spiritual growth, it's really weird to say this, but it didn't really happen in church. Church has just been like kind of a place where I can go and say, oh yeah, these people like think this, or like these people think about this in the same way that I do. Or I hear a sermon and I'm like, whoa, this is an interesting thing to consider, food for thought for the next week until I come back and get some more things to think about. It's not a place where I go to experience religion. It's a place where I go to learn more about it and to continue my spiritual growth. And I feel like a lot more growth happens outside of the church when I'm interacting with people. And especially at these church camps and youth events, they've just been like a really, really important part of my spiritual growth. I feel like without them, I would not have continued to go to church or even really like believe in the things that I do. Like there will always be that part of me that's like, yes, I need to love everyone, love my neighbors, and that's just the way to do things. But I feel like my spirituality and relationship with God would be like a lot different and a lot more distant. But I feel like with these youth events at church camps and Convo, it's really allowed me to just examine how I view this concept of God and how I view the Methodist faith and how I interact with people, how I carry myself. It's just been an incredible experience, quite frankly, to be in these events. So I think a lot of my growth has to do not in the church's building itself, but with the community and the food for thought that it provides.
I like that. Because church is not a building, right? You mentioned events. Are you someone who likes to attend Convo and also church camp?
Yeah, I do enjoy them quite a bit. I've been going to church camp since I think 7th grade, Convo since 6th grade where I can. I've missed quite a few years in between with Convo just because I've been so busy with other high school stuff, or I've been just unable to go for whatever reason. But yeah, I always look forward to these like sort of pop-up events, and I've tried my best to go to every single one just because the people there and the experience is something that you can't really get anywhere else.
Reghan, I hear a lot of young people in our conference and in our Montana church communities express similar thoughts about church camp and other youth events. But what about these events is so special, and how come these have been such integral parts of your spiritual formation?
Well, I really think at church camp on Flathead Lake, first of all, you're in the middle of nature near a very large body of water that kind of reminds you that you aren't the only person around and you aren't the only thing that exists on earth. And it's a very humbling experience to be near large bodies of water because you can kind of just center yourself and stop thinking about like who you are as a person and really just start thinking. That's how I view large bodies of water, at least. And along with that, it's just, even at a convo, it's a really easy place to just find a quiet corner and just sort of chill for a bit. And I feel like that's really important. And the people there, it's just like the most welcoming, accepting, non-judgmental environment that I've ever been into. Nobody has like expectations for you beyond common human decency. So it's just like, we don't expect you to be this type of person. We don't expect you to be like this kind of person. Just come in here with a sense of love, being ready to learn and grow and meet new people, and you're going to have a great time. And that's always how it goes. Like, I don't know, I feel like as a teenager and just as a person with the relationships that I have, there are a lot of expectations on me, especially as I'm like hitting senior year and I'm growing a lot and I'm trying to get my life in order. It's just nice to be able to take a step back and talk to people who don't expect me to be like the perfect person or to be like anything other than myself. And it's just a very, very lovely environment to be in. And especially camp is like a little bit more than convo, to the point where you can just be yourself. And I think it has to do with the location, really, because Flathead Lake is just like a beautiful spiritual place where you're like, whoa, nature is so much bigger than me. Look at this beautiful place. Look at all these wonderful, welcoming people. There has to be some sort of greater being involved with this. So I think it's just like a very humbling experience, but at the same time, a place where I can just like be entirely myself without facing any judgment or expectations of otherwise. And I think it's pretty cool.
Well, I really hope we're able to have camp this summer, especially since you being a senior. I hope you have another opportunity to enjoy that as a student. And then, do you have plans after high school? Do you want to stay involved with the camp?
I mean, I'd really love to. I am going to be moving to Bozeman for college, though, so I don't really know how that's going to work. But I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens. And, you know, I'll always have these people with me on my phone, but also in my heart. So I guess I'll just find out when I get there.
Reghan, do you think when you go off to college, do you think that you'll seek out a church or spiritual community?
I mean, maybe. It's just, I think I've gotten to the point where I can continue my relationship with God without church. So it's not like an absolute necessity for me to be spiritual and to go to church at the same time. I feel like I've gotten a lot of tools and skills from church as well as convo and camp that just allows me to be able to go out into the world and just be a spiritual person without having to have a community readily available every Sunday. But I mean, if I have time and if I'm not partying too hard in college, maybe I'll go to church a few times.
Oh, I love it. At least you're honest.
Yeah.
Well, and let's be fair. When you go to college, there's so many things to do, and you're just gotta get involved with things. So
yeah.
I know when I first went off to college, I don't think I had sought out church groups or anything right away. Like I think a camp friend was on campus, and so we would like meet up and hang out, and would go over to the Wesley House, the campus ministry here in Missoula, for like their Bible studies and kind of dinner sessions, and then that kind of just fizzled off. And yeah, I think it's easy to get busy, and I think it's also makes sense that you're out on your own, like you're trying to figure out how to be a human without all your old roots, and trying to rediscover new things about yourself or about the new community that you're in. So yeah, I think that makes sense.
I know in Bozeman they do have a really great campus ministry program. So
that's good to know.
Yeah, it's Anne. Dick and Cheeks. Shout out to Anne.
Reghan, when you talked about church camp and youth retreats, you mentioned some pretty big differences between spiritual experiences with those compared to church. Do you think that the church is able to replicate some of those? I mean, I know we're looking at location, that might be a big part of it, but do you think that the church is able to replicate some of those experiences and formations of faith? And or do you think the church should even try to?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. I think that the church is very capable of making these spiritual connections, but the way that it's structured now is like very different to the way that convo and church camp are structured. And I feel like the whole experience with convo and church camp is that you're spending days at a time with each other, and it's not just being there for service and worship, it's being there for each other and being there to like be able to retreat into this area with all these other people. And I feel like church is very different because you're there for an hour, hour and a half tops in the Methodist case. And it's a lot of like group participation, but there's like not a ton of time to really get to know each other unless like they're having a potluck after church or whatever. So I think the church really could be capable of like making these experiences more spiritual, more personal, more like welcoming and get to know you. But where it stands now, it's going to take like a lot of restructuring and like a lot of people being able to be willing to change the way that the church is structured, which is kind of a difficult concept to consider because a lot of people have experienced church in one way their entire lives, and over a period of thousands of years, it's been like evolving very slowly in the way that it's done because we just don't really want to have change. Like this is the backbone of a lot of people's lives. Like this is the one constant, and the concept of change can be very scary, especially in a spiritual sense. So I feel like, yeah, the church could change, but will it? It might. I mean, it depends, and it depends on each individual church too. I mean, like our church does things differently than Grace Methodist and then the Catholic Church in town and the Baptists and all the other denominations. And it really just depends on the people there and who's willing to change and if they're all willing to change.
Aside from what it sounds like wanting to maybe stick to tradition or to what people have always known about church, which is a common, I think, thread that we pull out of some of these conversations. Why do you think the church or people in church are hesitant to make those changes?
I mean, it really depends. And I think it's hesitance to change, but it's also just the way that some people tend to interpret the Bible, which is like great because people can interpret religion however they want. But a lot of people that I have met believe that there's like one way to do church. There's one way to worship. There's one way to pray. There's one way to think about things. And it's fine, and they can think that way, but it's also like there are lots of different ways, I believe, to be able to curate your relationship with God. And the way that things are interpreted a lot of the time with some people that I've met are just like, this is what it says, this is how we should take it, because this is how people have been interpreting this throughout thousands of years. And this is obviously what God wants us to do, is have church this way, or like think about things this way, or act this way. And it's just like, I don't know. It's a very interesting thought to have because I've never been that way. I've never been a one way to do things type of person. So I feel like that's the approach with a lot of people, but at the same time, there's a lot of other people that are like approaching things in a different way. And I think it's a very interesting conflict of ideas. And I feel like if we're able to listen to each other, have conversations, try to figure out like what's going on with the church and how we can make it better as a community, instead of just like as a few people in the church want it, it would be a lot better off.
You've mentioned a couple times about community. Do you think that the church does a good job of being in community with one another, or is that somewhere where the church needs to do better?
I feel like my church is actually pretty good at that. I mean, I haven't been to church since COVID started. Oops. But I feel like throughout the years, it's just been very good at being able to talk to the people and foster a community, however brief the services may be. But I feel like other churches are like very not catering to the needs of like the entire community, and instead just focusing on one person who wants change. Like one of my mom's best friends goes to a church in rural Idaho, I think. I don't know where she lives, but this church is like a group of people who all like have pretty similar views, and they all want church like one way, and then there's like one person in their ministry that wants to change things and go about things in a different way, but the people don't really want things to go the way that this one person in the ministry wants them to go. So it's causing a lot of conflict and not creating like a very good sense of community there. And as a result, people aren't going to church anymore, and they're just not having a good time when they go to church because there's one person that's making changes without consulting the entire community. And I feel like it's very important that we're able to hear all voices. And I mean, that's one of the reasons for this podcast, right? To hear a lot of different perspectives on it. And I feel like if churches were able to listen to their entire community and be able to make a service that fits the needs of everyone, that would be a utopian society. But I also feel like there are some things that could just be done better with communication with the people that go to church.
It's definitely always interesting, I think, being in church or spiritual communities where there's kind of this tension or this expectation that we should just handle everything with a smile on our face and, always work to like either brush the tension under the rug or avoid it altogether.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to you talk about community and, what that could look like. I mean, in a utopian society or utopian church, and chances are we'll probably never get to live in a utopian church or world, then it would no longer be a utopia, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious then, what does a healthy community look like in church?
I think it's just people that enjoy going to church and are able to grow from it, and also just exist with their community and get along with people at the same time. Like, you don't have to have the same views of the world. You don't have to have the same political views. You don't even have to have the same sense of spirituality. But a good, healthy community shows acceptance to all these people and works together to grow and understand each other. And that doesn't mean like everyone thinks the same way. It just means that we are able to have a foundation of respect and understanding with each other. And we're also able to go into this house of God and be able to curate our relationship with whatever the people view God to be. And it's just like a place with less conflict and more like, I don't know, conversation and more inner spiritual growth and more internal conversation as well.
That's a good question, though, Court. I'm glad you asked that. I'm hoping other churches, other folks out there can be thinking about that too. What does a healthy community look like?
Reghan, what do you think the church will look like in 5 years?
I think the church will look like a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the church that I grew up in. I think it will look a lot more like the Oh boy. Well, I mean, it depends on whether this pandemic ever ends, am I right? But I also think that at least with my church, we're going to see a lot of like changing of people going. I mean, since I'm moving, I won't be able to view it, but over church as a whole, I feel like it's going to go through a lot of change, and I don't know what change that will be. I don't know how it will change. I don't know when it will, but I feel like we're coming up to a point where people are able to consider church in a lot of different forms, and there's a lot of options out there. So in order to, stay relevant and keep hip with the youth, I feel like church is going to have to make a little bit of a change, and even a big change. But I don't see it changing very rapidly overnight, but over the next 5 years, I feel like, at least with our church and the way it's structured, it could be very different.
You mentioned the church possibly having to stay relevant or stay hip with the youth, rather. And I think that that's a huge conversation that is happening across denominations and religions in this time, is whether or not the church is relevant for young people, and especially for younger generations. And I think there's this idea, I think some of it's backed up by data as well, but there's kind of this idea out there that younger generations, such as millennials and Gen Z, especially, just don't have a place for religion or spirituality in their life. And I'm curious, do you think that that's true? And follow-up question on that, so kind of two questions in one here. Do you think that that's true, that younger generations don't need or don't have an affinity for religion and spirituality? And how do you think churches can be relevant to younger generations if they're not already?
All right. Yeah. I think that churches are really becoming irrelevant, at least to my generation. Like, most people I know don't go to church and aren't religious per se. Like, there's a lot of diversity in how people view the world and its creation and the big bad whatever is happening behind pulling the strings. But I think that a lot of people are just like, well, I don't know. And they're comfortable with saying, I don't know, and just staying with it, which is fine. But I think that a lot of what my generation is going through is hearing about the homophobia within churches, or a lot of things that happen in the Catholic Church per se, like the whole scandal thing there. And a lot of people that they meet, or at least some people they meet, they have bad experiences with because of conflicting views based on faith or something like that. So I feel like within my generation, church has kind of gotten a bad name, at least Christian church has, for a lot of reasons. I know that the LGBTQ community has been oppressed, especially through churches, throughout a very, very long time. And I see a lot of progression, though, that people aren't really talking about. My church, the Methodist Church, flies pride flags, and we accept everyone, and that's just what we've been taught, or what I've been taught through this church. And I know that it's a lot more of a complex issue than I'm making it sound, but it is very complex, and we need to approach it and be able to confront it instead of just ignoring it and sweeping it under the rug, like you mentioned earlier. And I think that because of this bad press that the Christian community has been getting, which is honestly rightfully so, we've just been not getting any good press either. And so a lot of people view Christians as all of them are homophobic, or all of them are in some way crazy about it or whatever. And they don't really see any examples of the people that are just accepting and loving through Christ and just trying to be the best people that they can be, which is the way that I interpret my Christianity. It's a very vast and like diverse religion, and I feel like it's been very simpled down and made into something bad by like various media forms in a lot of different ways, and that's been sort of driving my generation away. Along with that, we're a very nihilistic generation, very nihilistic, very kind of in the middle of what seems to be the end of the world at sometimes. So I get why people find it hard to think that there's like a spiritual force or a great God or even anything bigger than humanity and its faults out there that is good. Like a lot of people think that the world is a horrible place, and it can be sometimes, but they just think that there's nothing good left in some cases, and it leaves them to be like just driven away from religion, because why would I believe in a higher power if climate change is happening, or if this is happening, or if war is happening, or if I can't even like get enough money to be able to feed my family, sort of thing. So it's a very dire world, and people are like kind of driven away from the hope that religion brings. So I feel like there's some of that as well.
Well, and I think you talked about it earlier, we can experience God outside of church,
Totally.
at camp, mission trip, all kinds of places. So
yeah, and I know plenty of people who are spiritual and who believe in some sort of like force that is beyond humanity that just don't go to church and don't believe in traditional Christian values, but they tell me that they still pray or they still believe that there is like a force of good and evil in this world, or that something is making the world continue to go round. And I feel like that's a very interesting thing to consider, because maybe people don't go to church, but maybe there are some people who are just believing in God without having to. And I think that it's a very like cool way to approach things, to think that, maybe I don't go to church and maybe I don't really talk about it all the time, but I'm still like believing in a higher power, and this is a part of my life. And I feel like church can really help curate that relationship, or even like spread the good word to people. But I feel like my generation, and yes, millennials, aren't really going to church to experience that. So it's not really opening that door for them if they haven't had that door opened already.
How do you think the church can bridge that gap between what it looks like right now, as you've described to us, or how you think it's perceived by younger generations?
I really don't know. And I feel like that's a very safe thing to say, because there's a lot of ways it can be approached, and none of them are going to be the right or wrong answer. And it's such a obviously complex system already in a very complex world that it's just kind of difficult to think about a whole church combating this issue. But I feel like if I'm able to comfortably start talking about my experiences with church and with God to other people, that maybe they'll start thinking about it. It's not like I want to run out and convince everyone to think the way I think. I think it's just, if people in my generation who are spiritual start talking about their spirituality more and get more comfortable with their own relationship with God, they can really show people that, hey, I'm Gen Z, I am like a regular person, but I also have this relationship with God, and it's not bad. And people I'm not going to church, and getting oppressed all the time, that it would really like change the views of some people. And I've had conversations like this before where I've just brought up church camp and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I didn't know you went to church. You believe in God? And I'm like, uh-huh. So I feel like it's a thing that, I don't know, a lot of Christian people in my generation just sort of repress and don't talk about with their friends that aren't from church because it feels super awkward. So it's like, well, maybe we should be able to like talk about it openly and just put it simply and not have to have an existential crisis over it. So I feel like it's a learning curve to be able to talk about your spirituality in a way that makes you comfortable and another person comfortable listening to you.
Yeah, I know when I was in high school and would talk about church camp with my friends, I'd always get those like raised eyebrows of like, what? You go to church camp?
Yeah.
So, but then I would tell them about it and they're like, that doesn't sound like the church camp that I've heard of.
Yep.
And then they would end up coming the next summer and their worldview in some capacity was changed. Their understanding and connection to spirituality was changed. And yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential to bridge those gaps in our communities, kind of like what you're saying, when we're open about our own experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like people also have an expectation of what a Christian person looks like, which is also very funny. They're expecting this, I don't know, there's an expectation of someone who doesn't swear ever, or who's just like this straight cis person who talks about God all the time. And then here comes me, part of the LGBTQ community, swearing like a sailor, talking about church camp. And I feel like it is very much a curveball to the expectation of what Christianity looks like. And I feel like we should start breaking down those barriers of what a Christian person looks like, because it can really be anyone of any demographic, unless you're like another religion. And then I mean, you're that other religion and not Christian, which is cool.
Yeah, that makes me think of it's 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12 through 13, I think. It's Bible trivia for me, but it's something about like that idea of like neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male or female, like whatever. We were all made to drink of one spirit.
Yeah.
Well, before we make our way out of here, we always tend to ask our interviewees if there's any biblical story or piece of scripture that you draw inspiration from that you'd like to share with us and our listeners today.
I always thought that the story of Moses coming into Egypt, just pulling out power move after power move on the Pharaoh, was just like a huge inspiration to me as a child. So I grew up watching The Prince of Egypt like a lot because it's like a great movie, right? And just seeing this dude who is already like living bigly, right? He's got everything he could possibly want. And then he just goes out, finds God, comes back, and just like lays it on his brother. Like, dude, you can't be a terrible person. This sucks. You suck. You need to stop, or I'm going to unleash godly wrath upon you. I feel like it's just a very great lesson to learn that, you know, even if you are living bigly, you should stand up for the people who aren't living bigly, even if that means confronting someone you love.
Throwback to Prince of Egypt. I like it.
Such a good film.
Good music.
Amanda, do you have any other lingering thoughts or questions for Reghan before we start to wrap up our interview?
I don't think so, but I've really enjoyed it, Reghan. Given me a lot to think about.
Well, Reghan, I think you've covered it all today.
Great.
So,
We've solved all the world's problems.
That's exactly what I was hoping we would cover in this episode. So, perfect. Well, thanks again for joining us. I know I really enjoyed getting to talk to you and listen to you. It's always a pleasure. It's been too long.
Yeah, thanks so much, Reghan.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Mountain Sky Prophets. Mountain Sky Prophets is brought to you by Young People's Ministries and Next Gen and Inclusiveness Ministries of the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church. You can find us at www.mtnskyumc.org. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you tell your friends to listen in too.